Newt stared desperately at the equipment racks. "You'd think there'd be a manual or something," he said. "We could see if Agnes has anything to say," volunteered Anathema. "Oh, yes," said Newt bitterly. "That makes sense, doesn't it? Sabotaging 20th century electronics with the aid of a 17th century workshop manual? What did Agnes Nutter know of the transistor?" "Well, my grandfather interpreted prediction 3328 rather neatly in 1948 and made some very shrewd investments," said Anathema. "She didn't know what it was going to be called, of course, and she wasn't very sound about electricity in general, but I was speaking rhetorically. You don't have to make it work anyway. You have to stop it working. You don't need knowledge for that. You need ignorance." Newt groaned. "All right," he said wearily. "Let's try it. Give me a prediction." Anathema pulled a card out at random. "He is not that which he says he is," she read. "It's numbered 1002. Very simple. Any ideas?" "Well, look," said Newt wretchedly. "This isn't really the time to say it, but—" he swallowed. "Actually, I'm not very good with electronics. Not very good at all." "You said you were a computer engineer, I seem to remember." "That was an exaggeration. I mean, just about as much of an exaggeration as you can possibly get, in fact, really. I suppose it was more what you might call an overstatement. I might go so far as to say that what it really was," Newt closed his eyes, "was a prevarication." "A lie, you mean?" said Anathema sweetly. "Oh, I wouldn't go that far," said Newt, "although," he added, "I'm not actually a computer engineer at all. Quite the opposite." "What's the opposite?" "If you must know, every time I try and make anything electronic work, it stops." Anathema gave him a bright little smile and posed theatrically, like that moment in every conjurer's stage act when the lady in the sequin steps back to reveal the trick. "Tra-la!" she said. "Repair it," she said. "What?" "Make it work better," she said. "I don't know," said Newt. "I'm not sure I can." He laid a hand on top of the nearest cabinet. There was the noise of something he hadn't realized he'd been hearing suddenly stopping, and the descending whine of a distant generator. The lights on the panels flickered, and most of them went out. All over the world, people who had been wrestling with switches found that they switched. Circuit breakers opened. Computers stopped planning World War III and went back to idly scanning the stratosphere. In bunkers under Novaya Zemlya, men found that the fuses they were frantically trying to pull out came away in their hands at last. In bunkers under Wyoming and Nebraska, men in fatigue stopped screaming and waving guns at one another and would have had a beer if alcohol had been allowed in missile bases. It wasn't, but they had one anyway. The lights came on. Civilization stopped its slide into chaos and started writing letters to the newspapers about how people got so overexcited about the least little things these days. In Tadfield, the machines ceased radiating menace. Something that had been in them was gone, quite apart from the electricity. "Gosh," said Newt. "There you are," said Anathema. "You fixed it good. You can trust old Agnes, take it from me. Now let's get out of here." "He didn't want to do it," said Aziraphale. "Haven't I always told you, Crowley? If you take the trouble to look deep down inside anyone, you'll find that at bottom they're really quite—" "It's not over," said Curly flatly. Adam turned and appeared to notice them for the first time. Crowley was not used to people identifying him so readily, but Adam stared at him as though Crowley's entire life history was pasted inside the back of his skull and he, Adam, was reading it. For an instant he knew real terror. He'd always thought the sort he'd felt before was the genuine article, but that was mere abject fear beside this new sensation. Those below could make you cease to exist by, well, hurting you in an unbearable amount. But this boy could not only make you cease to exist merely by thinking about it, but probably could arrange matters so that you had never existed at all. Adam's gaze swept to Aziraphale. "Excuse me, why are you two people?" said Adam. "Well," said Aziraphale, "it's not right being two people," said Adam. "I reckon you'd better go back to being two separate people." There were no showy special effects. There was just Aziraphale sitting next to Madame Tracy. "Ooh, that felt tingly," she said. She looked Aziraphale up and down. Oh, she said, in a slightly disappointed voice. Somehow I thought you'd be younger. Shadwell glowered jealously at the angel and thumbed the Thundergun's hammer in a pointed sort of way. Aziraphale looked down at his new body, which was, unfortunately, very much like his old body, although the overcoat was cleaner. Well, that's over, he said. No, said Curly. No, it isn't. You'll see. Not at all. Now there were clouds overhead, curling like a pot of tagliatelle on full boil. You see, said Curly, his voice leaden with fatalistic gloom, it doesn't really work that simply. You think wars get started because some old duke gets shot, or someone cuts off someone's ear, or someone sighted their missiles in the wrong place. It's not like that. That's just reasons, which haven't got anything to do with it. What really causes wars is two sides that can't stand the sight of one another, and the pressure builds up, and then anything will cause it, anything at all. What's your name, boy? That's Adam Young, said Anathema, as she strode up with Newt trailing after her. That's right, Adam Young, said Adam. Good effort. You've saved the world. Have a half-holiday, said Crowley, but it won't really make any difference. I think you're right, said Aziraphale. I'm sure my people want Armageddon. It's very sad. Would anyone mind telling us what's going on, said Anathema, sternly folding her arms. Aziraphale shrugged. It's a very long story, he began. Anathema stuck out her chin. Go on, she said. Well, in the beginning, the lightning flashed, struck the ground a few meters from Adam, and stayed there, a sizzling column that broadened at the base, as though the wild electricity was filling an invisible mold. The humans pressed back against the jeep. The lightning vanished, and a young man made out of golden fire stood there. Oh dear, said Aziraphale. Oh dear, said Aziraphale. It's him. Him who? Said Crowley. The voice of God, said the angel. The Metatron. The them stared. Then Pepper said, No, it isn't. The Metatron's made of plastic, and it's got a laser cannon, and it can turn into a helicopter. That's the cosmic Megatron, said Wensleydale weakly. I had one, but the head fell off. I think this one is different. The beautiful blank gaze fell on Adam Young, and then turned sharply to look at the concrete beside it, which was boiling. A figure rose from the churning ground in the manner of the Demon King in a pantomime. But if this one was ever in a pantomime, it was one where no one walked out alive, and they had to get a priest to burn the place down afterwards. It was not greatly different to the other figure, except that its flames were blood red. Said Crowley, trying to shrink into his seat. Hi. The red thing gave him the briefest of glances, as though marking him for future consumption, and then stared at Adam. When it spoke, its voice was like a million flies taking off in a hurry. It buzzed a word that felt, to the humans who heard it, like a file dragged down the spine. It was talking to Adam, who said, Huh? No, I already said. My name's Adam Young. He looked the figure up and down. What's yours? Beelzebub, Crowley supplied. He's lord of... Thank you, Crowley, said Beelzebub. Later we must have a serious talk. I am sure thou hast much to tell me. Said Crowley. Well, you see, what happened was... Silence! Right, Crowley said Crowley hurriedly. Now then, Adam Young, said the Metatron, while we can of course appreciate your assistance at this point, we must add that Armageddon should take place now. There may be some temporary inconvenience, but that should hardly stand in the way of the ultimate good. Ah, whispered Crowley to Aziraphale. What he means is, we have to destroy the world in order to save it. As to what it stands in the way of, that has yet to be decided, buzzed Beelzebub. But it must be decided now, boy. That is thy destiny. It is written. Adam took a deep breath. The human watchers held theirs. Crowley and Aziraphale had forgotten to breathe some time ago. I just don't see why everyone and everything has to be burned up and everything, Adam said. Millions of fish and whales and trees and sheep and stuff. And not even for anything important, just to see who's got the best gang. It's like us and the Johnsonites, but even if you win, you can't really beat the other side, because you don't really want to. I mean, not for good. You just start all over again. You'll just keep on sending people like these two, he pointed to Curly and Aziraphale, to mess people around. It's hard enough being people as it is without other people coming and messing you around. Curly turned to Aziraphale. Johnsonites, he whispered. The angel shrugged. Early breakaway sect, I think, he said. Sort of Gnostics, like the Ophites. His forehead wrinkled. Or were they Sethites? No, I'm thinking of Collyridians. Oh, dear, I'm sorry. There were hundreds of them. It's so hard to keep track. People been messed around, murmured Curly. It doesn't matter, snapped the Metatron. The whole point of the creation of the earth was good and evil. I don't see what's so terrific about creating people as people and getting upset because they act like people, said Adam severely. Anyway, if you stop telling people it's all sorted out after they're dead, they might try sorting it all out while they're alive. If I was in charge, I'd try making people live a lot longer, like old Methuselah. It'd be a lot more interesting, and they might start thinking about the sort of things they're doing to the environment and ecology because they'll still be around in 100 years' time. Ah, said Beelzebub, and he actually began to smile. You wish to rule the world. That's more like thy father. I thought about it, and I don't want to, said Adam, half turning and nodding encouragingly at them. I mean, there's some stuff could do with some altering, but then I expect people to keep coming up to me and getting me to sort out everything the whole time and get rid of all the rubbish and make more trees for them, and where's the good in all that? It's like having to tidy up people's bedrooms for them. You never tidy up even your bedroom, said Pepper behind him. I never said anything about my bedroom, said Adam, referring to a room whose carpet had been lost to view for several years. It's general bedrooms, I mean. I didn't mean my personal bedroom. It's an analogy. That's just what I'm saying. Beelzebub and the Metatron looked at one another. Anyway, said Adam, it's bad enough having to think of things for Pepper and Wensley and Brian to do all the time so they don't get bored. So I don't want any more world than I've got. Thank you all the same. The Metatron's face began to take on the look familiar to all those subjected to Adam's idiosyncratic line of reasoning. You can't refuse to be who you are, it said eventually. Listen, your birth and destiny are part of the great plan. Things have to happen like this. All the choices have been made. Rebellion is a fine thing, said Beelzebub, but some things are beyond rebellion. You must understand. I'm not rebelling against anything, said Adam in a reasonable tone of voice. I'm pointing out things. Seems to me you can't blame people for pointing out things. Seems to me it'd be a lot better not to start fighting and just see what people do. If you stop messing them about, they might start thinking properly, and they might stop messing the world around. I'm not saying they would, he added conscientiously, but they might. This makes no sense, said the Metatron. You can't run counter to the great plan. You must think. It's in your genes. Think. Adam hesitated. The dark undercurrent was always ready to flow back, its reedy whisper saying, yes, that was it. That was what it was all about. You have to follow the plan because you are part of it. It had been a long day. He was tired. Saving the world took it out of an 11-year-old boy. Body. Crowley stuck his head in his hands. For a moment there, just for a moment, I thought we had a chance, he said. He had them worried. Oh, well, it was nice while... He was aware that Aziraphale had stood up. Excuse me, said the angel. The trio looked at him. This great plan, he said. This would be the ineffable plan, would it? There was a moment's silence. It's the great plan, said the Metatron flatly. You are well aware. There shall be a world lasting 6,000 years, and it will conclude with... Yes, that's the great plan, all right, said Aziraphale. He spoke politely and respectfully, but with the air of one who has just asked an unwelcome question at a political meeting and won't go away until he gets an answer. I was just asking if it's ineffable as well. I just want to be clear on this point. It doesn't matter, snapped the Metatron. It's the same thing, surely. Surely, thought Crowley. They don't actually know. He started to grin like an idiot. So, you're not 100% clear on this, said Aziraphale. It's not given to us to understand the ineffable plan, said the Metatron, but of course the great plan. But the great plan can only be a tiny part of the overall ineffability, said Crowley. You can't be certain that what's happening right now isn't exactly right from an ineffable point of view. It is written, bellowed Beelzebub. But it might be written differently somewhere else, said Crowley, where you can't read it. In bigger letters, said Aziraphale. Underlined, Crowley added. Twice, suggested Aziraphale. Perhaps this isn't just a test of the world, said Crowley. It might be a test of you people, too, God does not play games with his loyal servants, said the Metatron, but in a worried tone of voice. Woo-ee, said Crowley. Where have you been? Everyone found their eyes turning towards Adam. He seemed to be thinking very carefully. Then he said, I don't see why it matters what is written. Not when it's about people. It can always be crossed out. A breeze swept across the airfield. Overhead, the assembled hosts rippled like a mirage. There was a kind of silence there might have been on the day before creation. Adam stood smiling at the two of them, a small figure perfectly poised exactly between heaven and hell. Crowley grabbed Aziraphale's arm. You know what happened? He hissed excitedly. He was left alone. He grew up human. He's not evil incarnate or good incarnate. He's just human incarnate. Then, I think, said the Metatron, that I shall need to seek further instructions. I also, said Beelzebub. His raging face turned to Crowley. And I shall report your part in this. Thou hadst better believe it. He glared at Adam. And I do not know what thy father will say. There was a thundering explosion. Shadwell, who had been fidgeting with horrified excitement for some minutes, had finally got enough control of his trembling fingers to pull the trigger. The pellets passed through the space where Beelzebub had been. Shadwell never knew how lucky he had been that he'd missed. The sky wavered and then became just sky. Around the horizon, the clouds began to unravel.